Hi there, it's Joel Greenberg, and we are Life in Stages, the podcast. And today we are going to be spending time talking with and listening to Sharry Flett. And hi, Sharry.
Hello, Joel.
Hi. You know, Sharry and I, we'll probably get to this, but I was thinking about this as I was coming to the studio, and this number, thinking, well, it's not quite, it's about 55 years since we first met. And
you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And it's just too weird. I mean, it's true, but it those numbers don't just roll off the tongue. It was so long ago, and the memory of it is not. I mean, the memory of it is still so present.
It's very present. It's I have to thank you for this, because while you're living your life, as you know, and as everybody knows, you're just living with 5 minutes ahead, 2 minutes ahead, 1 minute ahead. Suddenly I am contemplating all of this, and it's a shock to the system, and yet it's an absolute gift to feel that both of us and many more of us have actually survived in the arts for this number of years.
Yeah.
In Canada as well. So it bodes very well, but it's some great memories were coming up as I was contemplating it all, and you were so much a part of it, because again, it was McGill. You were elsewhere. You were at Sir George Williams. Yes.
Yeah.
And that meeting while I was still at McGill, and us working together with your wonderful summer festival at Sir George Williams.
Right. Yeah.
Which I will never forget.
Yeah. No.
And so we did the Fantasticks. We did America-Hurrah, and we did
Oh, What a Lovely War.
Oh, What a Lovely War.
Yeah. And one of the plays that summer that you weren't working in was a 2 or 3 one-act plays by Lanford Wilson, who at the time was my sort of god figure. And one evening, I think this may have come up in an earlier, like in series 1, I'm not sure, but this story is quintessential who I was then, and maybe still am, but certainly who I was then. So we noticed that there was hardly anybody at the theater that night, and somebody pointed out that was the night that there was a moon landing, that men were walking on the moon for the first time. And I said, yeah, so. and so we decided it was best to not even pretend. And we found a television somewhere, and we watched the men land on the moon. And that says, that was certainly who I was then. I mean, why would people not come to the theater because they could stay home and watch something that had never happened before?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I remember that so well.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I wasn't doing the Lanford Wilson. I was sitting on a balcony looking at the moon and at the television at the same time, which was absolutely stunning.
Yeah. So that's, so I'm going to go back from there. So we met as children that summer, and I'm always fascinated by how artists who have established careers and have maintained and sustained and all of that, where that begins. And but my first question, and probably the only planned question, is, was this part of your youth and family and that world? Yeah.
No, it's a good question for everybody. I'm always fascinated by the people who said as soon as they could speak, I knew that I was going to do this.
Yeah.
And I'm always fascinated by that. No, I came from a suburban family, and my father was a chemical engineer, and my mother's family was in medicine. I thought that I would end up moving towards medicine. And it was really teachers that must have spotted something
Yeah.
where I, blindly was told, no, you can't do this option. You have to do this option,
Right.
which was music.
Okay.
And music seemed to open up chapters for me.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating because when you think back, it's usually teachers or mentors of some sort who just sort of guide you along this way or that way.
Yeah.
And then the rest takes over, which I think has a lot to do with passion, excitement, the world of it,
Yeah.
the curiosity of it. There's so much curiosity, which doesn't end, really. I find even now at these years, curiosity just sort of keeps propelling you forward.
Yeah. So with you make certainly the reference to teachers and to school and to being pushed into or encouraged, whatever is the right word. Does this begin in sort of in elementary school, in high school?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, it was for me. It was it was an elementary school teacher who happened to hear my singing voice and propelled me into music in high school.
Right.
So,
right.
And then you become fascinated, and then you start taking lessons, and then you start meeting really good teachers, and one thing leads to another.
Yeah. Yeah, because I met you when you were still at McGill, and I know that the first time we hadn't met, but the first time that I saw you, you were in a McGill Red and White Review, and so I knew that music was then certainly where you lived, and then we spent a good part of that the summer of I think it was '69.
Yeah, it was '69.
Doing music, but also working, expanding the range. So yes, you did music, but you also did, straight theater. I mean, however one divides or separates the various styles.
Yes, well, in a way, I was pursuing the classics and thought that it would be that I would move towards opera.
Okay.
But I also eventually recognized that I didn't have the instrument for opera. And so and again, what fascinated me was the sense of theater that sat inside of music and music sitting inside of theater.
Yeah.
So again, as a student, you keep expanding and exploring, and I guess passion starts to combine a lot of different things. So then you start to become fascinated by verse and Shakespeare and, what is it? What can we do? How can we accomplish and make it a career?
Oh, absolutely. I'm curious. You just mentioned that you realized you didn't have the instrument for opera. Was that a realization that you came to? Were you told that by others? How do you know that?
I wasn't told. Yes, I know. I wasn't told that because I kept on. At one point, because there weren't the schools in Canada at the time. One always either went to the States or you went to England. I went to England and auditioned also around Europe for opera schools, and people were willing to take me. But I also, at the end of my audition tour, which I did just at the end of university, I suddenly decided I had one audition at the end of this audition tour that was for a theater school in England. And I thought, this is what I want to do.
Oh, okay.
So it was that sudden moment of going, I need to go in this direction.
Right.
And,
that's the way to do it. It's Phyllis, who was a guidance counselor at Havergal for a long time, and one of the areas that was hers was helping students decide about universities when they were applying. And the advice always was, if you can, go. See walk there, be there, sit in, get a feel of that. You will know if a place either feels right or doesn't feel right. if you can do it, it's really
Yeah.
important to allow an emotional response to happen. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
That's great advice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which school did you go to?
Weber Douglas Academy was one of the
Yeah.
5 theater schools in London at the time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so the training that you had there, I'm curious because you had done so much music, you had studied music. Is there a how are those two disciplines or those two art forms different in their training?
Well, in terms of developing the voice,
Mm-hmm.
that is, and especially for the classics,
Mm-hmm.
it's it's as if you're training to be a superb athlete.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's that constant training of the voice,
Mm-hmm.
working with repertoire, working with accompanists. It's a constant digging. So if you're practicing 5 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably exactly right. But it's in terms of theater school
Yeah.
and what comes afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
to me, it only opened up a teeny tiny chapter
Mm-hmm.
as far as going to theater school.
Right.
So you go, you learn lots of different things that are, as we all know, is the full body experience.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the head, the mind, the rest of the body doing, and how
Right.
do you become flexible with
Mm-hmm.
that? And what is it that you have a good muscle for?
Right.
So
Right.
so it was really being there and coming back to Canada, which I thought, okay, I'm not done yet. I have to keep working. So you have to keep exploring and finding out what is the best way for
Mm-hmm.
me to express myself
Yeah.
if I want this as a career.
Right. Right. In speaking with a number of guests, different guests' training experiences have been fascinating to listen to, and we've talked at various points about the sort of the current political culture, and how that has changed for some, just the nature of what theater training is. And I know that theater training, certainly reading a lot about theater training in the UK, about schools that have, several schools which have closed or have reduced or completely transformed how they do the work.
Yes.
I have no doubt at all that with the many people you know and have worked with, if there's a conversation about being in school, in theater school,
Mm-hmm.
I mean the stories stories are all over the map. What was your experience like? Was it a human experience? Like was it a good experience?
Right. Yes, it was a good experience
Yeah.
because also being in an international city in New
Yes.
York,
Mm-hmm.
in London, the whole world is there for you to explore,
Right.
and
Right.
and in all the art forms. Um, it, it was a good experience, but also it was an unfinished experience. I knew that
Mm-hmm.
when I came back,
Mm-hmm.
that I needed a lot more technique. But then, in terms of theater schools, they were building technique at the time, so you were working on voice and
Mm-hmm.
body and plays
Yeah.
and understanding text.
Mm-hmm.
Text was very, very important, and all of these things have very altered
Yeah.
uh, now in terms of training processes.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how still you go, okay, is this a swing, and will the swing come back
Mm-hmm.
to becoming more textually informed, more voice production required, more body versatility required.
Yeah.
But also, what's so admirable is to see how I've worked a lot with, in terms of teaching outside of after Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
After the Shaw season being finished, I would be teaching at George Brown. and you would see how versatile and how flexible
Mhm.
people have to be, how self innovative
Yeah.
and creative and imaginative, and yet they have to be producing and they have to
Yeah.
be connecting with other ways of making the work happen out
Hmm.
there.
Yeah.
That's incredible,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think that's probably required internationally
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. No, I'm sure that's true, and I know that is where where this world is now.
Mm.
There are, I don't know how many companies in Toronto, how many indie companies. Many companies start. Some are around for a short period of time. Some actually are able to have an extended life. Uh, but it is always, I don't think I know anybody who isn't always wondering if they will, if the company will be there the next year. Uh,
Yes.
so the precarious nature of it really, for those people who are passionate about it, that I think there is something that the precarious nature of the job feeds the passion. Um,
Yes, and that needs to be unending. I mean,
yeah.
it's so easy to become disappointed and
Hmm.
to experience despair in this work as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
because, it's a job that either can make lots of dollars or a job that makes hardly anything.
Yeah.
And how do you create a profession out of it? How do
Yeah.
you feed your family?
Right.
It's
Right. Right.
it's a big question.
How how did how did you learn to deal with that? Because I think every performer, director, right? I mean, everybody is tested, because I don't
Hmm.
think the perception, I've with a couple of people that I've spoken to, is that you've got a public profile. You've been at the Shaw Festival for a very long time, so it's not unreasonable to think that people's perception is that Sharry Flett never stops working, and of course that probably is not accurate, because I don't think there's anybody who never stops working. Right?
Hmm. Yeah. No, it's very true. But I have to say that I've probably been very, very, very fortunate in
Mm-hmm.
terms of making a career in the theater
Yeah.
in Canada. The gifts have been repertory theater.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, at one time prior to that, um, you were looking for the 6 week, 8 week job
Yeah.
and connecting up the paychecks as well as the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But repertory theater has been very, very kind to me, and so for me, I've probably spent over 40 years in
Mm-hmm.
repertory
Yeah.
theater.
Yeah. Yeah. That has to be. You have to be part of I would think, of a fairly small group of people
Hmm.
who have had that, such a rich opportunity, and that
Absolutely.
is great. Um,
Mm.
Going back to, so did you, when you were done with, when you finished at Weber Douglas, did you return immediately after that, or did you spend added time in the UK?
I spent a few, yes, I probably spent maybe an extra 6 months, 7 months before I came back,
Okay.
just to extend the period and to be in London for a bit longer.
Yeah.
But I came back and immediately had to start looking for work.
Right.
So it's, yeah, yeah.
And how did that go?
It's actually, it actually went quite easily because I
Uh-huh.
guess there was a time where Alan Lund with Charlottetown Festival
Hmm.
was auditioning for Jane Eyre in Montreal,
Okay.
and I busted the audition. I was still in university,
Hmm.
and I walked in and asked if I could sing for him, and he remembered that.
Okay.
So
Okay.
after university and after theater school, I came back and auditioned for him again,
Okay.
and he immediately hired me.
Uh,
So
mhm.
it had a lot to do with that. And you were responsible in helping me had my first equity
Oh yeah. Yes.
job.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We did Turn Back Columbus at the
That's right.
embassy.
Oh, I know. Turn back
Do you
Columbus.
remember?
Please don't discover us. Oh yeah. No, I have, I have a memory. I have a memory for some things like remembering almost probably every show I've ever worked on. I remember that one, and I remember that it
Do
was.
you?
I do. Yeah, no, and I remember you and Jim Betts, Barry Van Ellen. I don't even. I just pulled that name out of my head.
Wow. Edda
And
Gaborik.
yes, that's right, Etta. Etta, who earlier. I was just telling somebody the other day that when I had the distinct pleasure of doing Dames at Sea with Yvonne DiCarlo, Etta Gaburik was in it. And Etta,
Oh,
Miss DiCarlo, took a real liking to Etta. Etta was a sweetheart. I mean, she was so easy. I mean, you had to like Etta. I couldn't imagine anybody not immediately.
she was wonderful.
Yeah. And I remember Yvonne's advice to Etta, which was just classic. She said, because Etta had cut her hair very short. She said, dear, you must let your hair grow long because lovers like their women to have their hair out on the pillow behind them. And I thought, and it was said with such simple honesty. And I thought, oh my God, it's classic, right? And Etta, of course, nodded. And as far as I know, she didn't immediately start growing her hair. I think she was quite happy with her shortcut. Anyway, and I do remember in Turn Back Columbus, everybody wore jumpsuits, sort of a stretchy faux fabric jumpsuit.
Yes.
And there we were.
Probably lots of polyester.
Absolutely. Oh, for sure. And there in the basement of the Embassy Tavern, which
Embassy
had been.
Tavern.
Yeah. Which is now Harry Rosen. Yep, doing this. Oddly enough, it was the 70s, right? It had to have been.
It was the 70s. Yeah.
So what do? You do a review about the United States, and Turn Back Columbus. Please don't discover us. Anyway, I'm glad. I think I know I learned from everything I did, but the fact that helped you get your equity card, that was worth it.
You got me my equity card. And it was also the last review I think I ever did. I don't think I was very good at them.
Well, yeah. No, you were like, I did a few more before I said enough. Like, really, the titles change, but they all certainly all feel pretty much the same. And that era ended with the arrival of Cats. That was the end of Review Theater. So you're at the Charlottetown Festival, and I know that you were. I don't have the chronology, but I know that I think that fairly soon after you had come back, you were at Stratford. Is that right?
Yes, I had 3 seasons at Charlottetown, and I also felt that I had to stop doing music theater in order to make the bridges at the time.
Yeah.
And so by doing that, I was able to funnel more into theater, and the serendipity of things happening suddenly seemed to happen for Stratford because John Hirsch, that was in that very turbulent shifting of artistic directors, and suddenly John Hirsch was in the artistic director's chair.
Yeah.
And he had met me in some time earlier.
I see.
And suddenly he said, and I think it was for a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. He said, I don't have anything for you now, but I will one day.
Okay.
And suddenly that phone rang for Stratford. And so and again, the serendipity of how I ended up in, to me, I think back on it, a circle of fire, because suddenly I was doing Taming of the Shrew with Len Cariou and working with Brian Bedford. And I thought, what has happened to me? What?
Yeah.
I'm suddenly doing this. What is this? And finding my way through that season.
Yeah.
It gave me another season. We did Tempest with Len Cariou. And then I returned in 85 for a third season. But that was virtually the end of working at Stratford.
Yeah. So that is fascinating, to find yourself opposite these people.
Mm-hmm.
And what's that like? Because in experience, I mean, you're dealing with people who have a tremendous amount of experience, and I know nothing about how, it's not digging, but how generous and how helpful. Because I can certainly imagine that in playing Taming of the Shrew, for instance, that the actor who you are opposite, it's going to be really fundamental to what the whole experience is like, whether or not you're working with somebody who is helping, especially realize, he would obviously know that you had less background than he in that, in that work. So what do you remember it being like?
I remember there was kindness.
Mm-hmm.
There was competitiveness. There was a moment where we were very close to, and again, it's that final speech with Taming of the Shrew,
Mm-hmm.
that I thought, if I don't voice what I need to voice right now,
Mm-hmm.
and we were very close to going into the tech week. We were on stage, and at that point, when I was asked by Petruchio to lay down that bauble,
Mm-hmm.
I stopped the rehearsal by saying no, and it just caused a shock to happen on the stage, because I thought it could lead to further discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, Len Cariou walked off stage and went to his dressing room. And so I was left standing there with the cast around. Len Cariou exited. And I thought, well, I really feel we need to discuss this blah, 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 blah at the end of the play.
Mm-hmm.
And it was discussed with kind Peter Hughes as the director, who was from England.
Yeah.
He listened, and everyone listened. And I think Len Cariou listened on the tannoy in his dressing room.
Yeah.
Eventually, he came back. We started again. That was the end of that. Never discussed again.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt I made some headway.
Right.
And I think in terms of the run, that the run went very well.
Mm-hmm.
My inexperience and the need to become better at all of this was very evident, but you have to keep on going.
Right.
And you have to take that. It's that aspect of saying yes, when possibly your inner instinct is saying, are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you say yes, you go, you see what happens, and you learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so those were extraordinary days that are implanted in my memory.
Oh, I've no doubt. I mean, I can certainly imagine how how foundational to a career that is. When actors, and I'm not for a moment suggesting that you are being asked to do something that you weren't quite ready for. I mean, that isn't what I'm saying at all. But when those moments happen, and you're saying you have to say yes, you're testing yourself, and whether you're aware of it or not, especially I think especially if you are aware of it, how charged an entire project can be for somebody. That's fascinating to hear, and I've certainly heard from actors who are fairly young, who have had experiences similar, and others who felt that that they had been thrown into something they just couldn't handle and didn't know how, I guess, didn't have the inner resources or the confidence, whatever the right words are, to figure out how to benefit from that.
Yes, because the learning curve is immense.
Yeah.
And also continuing to sustain after that, so that you continue to build on that. And for me, arriving at Shaw, it was that a step, because it also invited me into a place that was full of a sense of ensemble, full of a sense of working together on a project, working together in terms of what the crew is doing, what the designers are doing, what the director is doing, what the actors are doing.
Right.
So it became a very exciting time.
Oh, I'm sure. How soon after Stratford were you at Shaw?
I went down to the States for a little while and did some work there, came back, did a lot of television and some really exciting projects that I have great memories of before I ended up at Shaw. So it was about maybe 4 years.
Okay. And so in those 4 years, I mean, you said that you were working in the States. Was there, what differences, if any, did you find from the way the work was there as opposed to the work you had been doing, and then once you were back, how is it different working in Canada than it is working in the States?
I think I was doing something off Broadway, and you realize, no, it's not different. It's the same.
Okay.
It depends on who your director is, what the project is, what the budget is. Probably the difference between working on Broadway is a different experience between what we have to offer in Canada. But essentially, theater is the same everywhere you go.
Yeah. And having joined the Shaw Company, I mean, I know that clearly has been an extraordinarily rich period and a deep, an endlessly rich period for you. How, and I'm assuming that a lot of that had to do with your relationship with Christopher Newton. I mean, I'm making that assumption because he was the artistic director for a long time.
Yes. Again, Christopher is, to me, probably one of the finest artistic directors I've met in terms of what he sustained, how he had a sense of the pulse of what was needed as far as the audience was concerned in terms of the business of theater.
Yeah.
But he also touched all of the departments. And he also was somebody who listened. He was someone who had a great sense of humor. He was someone who was very inventive. He sort of thought, his critical thinking was fascinating. And he also, in terms of directing, I was directed by him, with him, a lot, a number of times. Both Anthony, my husband, and I have had a lot of experiences with Christopher in the past. And his way of directing, of being able to see outside of the box quite imaginatively and pull something in that was, you would just never think of, and it would sort of suddenly plant itself inside of the play that would suddenly make huge sense in a very imaginative way.
Yeah.
So he was one of a kind. And then Neil Monroe, who was his resident director as well, was absolutely wonderful to work with. So it seemed to be that teamship that was happening, and how Christopher built the teamships that there was enormous success, and
Right.
people, a lot of actors, some would come and go, and yet his sense of building a company was very important to him as well, and that moved from Christopher to Jackie Maxwell, who brought a lot of other wonderful aspects into the company at the time, and from her point of view, which had its own uniqueness, and yet she maintained something that I almost feel it's connected to Shaw and Shaw's philosophies. That those artistic directors that I've met so far, Christopher, Jackie, and now Tim Carroll, that they have a point of view or a philosophy that is somehow connected to Shaw, and I find that really, really interesting.
Can you explain that a bit?
Well, Shaw was very much a satirist, a humorist, very much thought of all the levels of society, and had political points of view that he would expand through his satirizing.
Right.
And they, at the same time, those artistic directors have a sense of what the needs of people are, how you bring theater to the public, what is it that the public needs, and just a sense of it's a sense of society and all the different levels of society. There's a great sensitivity that all three of them have and had.
Okay. Yeah. You and Anthony have, created a life in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and you, I don't know what she's doing now, but your daughter Michaela, who I met several times, but quite a number of years ago, I remember was quite involved with music. And I don't know, is that something that she still does?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. No, and that's the other thing, that being with the Shaw Festival allowed us to have family and to be together as a family. And that's the other aspect, is you tend to, I was very careful about starting family and the desire to, once you had family, to be together. And Shaw Festival allowed us that. It was a tremendous gift too. Michaela, under Jackie Maxwell's directorship, she ended up doing something in Gypsy, and she ended up being Frederica in A Little Night Music with Goldie Semple, the beautiful Goldie Semple. And after that time, she moved away from actually wanting to be in the arts and went more towards music therapy. So she now has her master's in music therapy, and she's and certifications in psychotherapy. So she's working with a clinic, and she's working with neurodiverse children and ages on both spectrums, of the young to the old.
Right.
So it's fascinating watching what she does and
That's
how
great.
it's all translated itself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I know that I guess maybe in more recent seasons, you've been cast. You've been cast in musicals a few times.
Yes.
And I assume there must be some pleasure in returning to a style that, where you first started working in theater.
Yes. And particularly this year, I find, because every year, now at this age and stage, I think, well, this is the last, and I won't be back. And I was in My Fair Lady last season, and the thrill, and it's the second time of doing this show, doing My Fair Lady at Shaw, I found such a pleasure standing back and watching what people have to do
Yeah.
to engage in music theater.
Yeah.
I mean, again, this to me, this is it's as if you're one of the finest tennis players going, or
Yeah.
or hockey players. I mean, the kind of energy and expertise that you need. I just it is gobsmacking to me now.
Yeah. 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 No,
Yeah.
seeing your name on on the cast list of musicals, I found very very heartwarming, because you've done. I mean, you've worked in you've worked in every style, and it was just personally, I found it lovely to see that you could still do that, or we're still willing to do that, and all these years later.
Explore it again.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I know that I know that you have taught. Do you still teach?
Let's see now. What can I say to that? Yes, I have been teaching. George Brown, I've been working with for many years.
Okay.
And I don't know whether that will continue or not,
Right.
because I had a conflict this year, so I couldn't work with them. But
Right.
we'll see.
And I'd like to hear your response to what teaching is for you, what it does for you, and how you are, how it informs the way you see a whole other generation of potential performing artists.
Mm-hmm. I was watching. I was asked to go to witness my 9-year-old great nephew, who was playing hockey and was in a hockey tournament. And I thought, well, I don't know much about hockey, but I'm going to go and support. And so I was there and watching all of these young boys out on the ice, speeding along with all of their gear on, and they were doing extraordinary things at the age of 9 years old.
Yeah.
To me, I sat there, and one game led to another, to another, to another, to another. And of course, my great nephew was also doing extremely well, and I started to learn more about the game of hockey. But at the same time, I thought this is a metaphor for working with these young people in the arts. And it's the same thing. It's the state of innocence, a state of talent that just exists, that's just there. It's an absolute privilege to work with younger people in the arts, because they need that passion. They need the passion, the curiosity, all of these things.
Yeah.
And then you're watching this innocent talent that's right there.
Right.
And in a way, you don't want to touch it.
Yeah.
You just sort of stand back and see how can this be guided? What can I throw out here every so often?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Yeah. I've taught a lot as well, and I used to find it I used to laugh, I think, inside. I didn't laugh as it was being done, but when young student actors would perhaps say things like, what happens if I move here? Can I move? I said, well, you can move. You can do whatever you want, unless you do it. Who knows what's going to happen? And it's not. The whole production is not going to falter because you decided to move or see what it was like to move on that line, or whatever the thing is. So that level of innocence is so charming. Sounds condescending, but I don't mean it that way. It's fascinating that there's a time where there's such weight given to every single moment, every possibility, and the uncertainty.
Yeah. And you realize that it's all in steps, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
and instinct and
yeah, yeah,
giving it a shot.
yeah. I don't know if you're, I don't know if you are or have been in a position of, giving advice to young performers, whether they're training, whether they're members of the Shaw Company or some other production. Uh, how, I don't know if you have given advice, but if you were to be asked for uh, suggestions for, drawing on your own experience, what should I be doing as I prepare to begin my career?
Mm.
What do you say?
Um, do you are you passionate?
Mm-hmm.
Are you curious? Listen to your instincts. Um, don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
Keep on saying yes. Um, when you say no, know that your instincts are telling you to say no.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, keep on learning, keep on reading. It was so great to watch one of the young people in the company this year who kept on pulling out his books
Mm-hmm.
and just reading books.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't on his phone.
Right.
He was looking at books and he
Yeah.
was 21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, good on you.
Yeah. 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 Yep.
Yeah. Look around you, use your five senses and your
Yeah.
sixth sense.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. And take the time to watch how other people do this work. I mean, it's so, the development is so cumulative. And I know, I know the frustration that theater students often have with classes, I think in my experience, particularly with voice work, because it is it's not a quick process. It's not, there aren't, students very often loved fight choreography and stage combat because it's like you're being given it's a series of tricks and exercises, and you can immediately see how to slap, how to receive a slap, how to fall. The voice it's a life experience, and it takes it you don't get it in one class. You don't get it in one term. It's your yeah.
It all takes time, and
Yeah.
we all can keep on learning as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Through so many experiences that you have had, who are the people who've been most formative in your career? And sometimes we understand those things by reflecting, not because we know at the time that somebody has been really quite instrumental and quite helpful and quite inspiring. Sometimes we know it when it happens, but sometimes we don't until sometimes it's in hindsight. And I'm just curious, because you've worked in so many different settings. I'm curious to know whose imprints are the strongest on you.
Going way back, it was a high school teacher and then a voice teacher at McGill. And I would say Christopher Newton. From a distance, John Hirsch. It was particularly impressionable, not necessarily an easy director, whereas Christopher Newton was embracing on many different levels and for many different reasons. So very much life influencing. And Neil Monroe as a director, fabulous director. And that's, yes, I think.
Well, that's good. I mean,
I think that's maybe certain actors that I've worked with.
Yeah.
have been very, very influencing, both male and female.
Yeah. And through all of this, I mean, maybe you may already have effectively answered this. For how you create a personal life, and how I think in a business that is often so consuming that the professional piece of you can overlap or subsume the personal. Have you been able to, you and Anthony, been able to create a really personal life that is not you don't run away from the festival or from where you live, but that you own, that is not an appendage to the professional?
Yes, I think we have, but you also have to work at that, and because it's those people, for the most part, will not be a part of your life as you keep on moving forward. It seems that you have to work very hard to create a pocket of friends, for instance, that will move through your life with you, and you will move with them. So to me, it's very important in terms of your relationship and family, is to be able to create that life that you share together that belongs to no one else, really. So it needs work to do that, and it's important to do that.
And is that something that you were always aware of, and that you were always conscious of working at?
Yes, but I guess also there's the time. I mean, Anthony and I have known each other a very long time.
Right.
And so we were quite young in theater school. So we've known each other since theater school.
Okay.
And there are the times where you are feverishly trying to build your career, which are parallel lines and not necessarily coming together lines, but and that's important to do. And if you last through that, then it's really important to build your own personal lives together. So that did come, thankfully, for us along the way.
Yeah, no, that is a very clear and a very important point. I mean, I do think that couples who are both performers, what a difficult challenge it is for I don't know if it's especially in the early years, but the task of creating one's own career is quite enough without having to, double, or double isn't the right word, but you certainly, I mean, you've said it, that it's parallel lines, and I know that there are many relationships that don't survive that.
Yeah, and I understand how that happens.
Sure.
What I admire is children and family, how people can be early in their careers and be building family at the same time. That to me is very difficult. I was more into the older woman having a child at an older age and having already had a lot of history in terms of the work behind me.
No, it's huge. It is huge. I know that my older daughter's an actor, and I think, I think I'm not making this up. I think that when she was probably just finished theater school, working with actors and really curious to be able to speak to actors who had children, and how you do that, or can you do that, I think was probably the first question. And being able to, finding some, some reassurance that people, knowing that people could do that, and that it wasn't rare to find that there were, actors who actually did have families with children. But I certainly understood the anxiety that led to that question. And
oh yes, yeah.
Well, this
and how do you when this is such a nomadic career to begin with?
Yeah.
How do you keep that sense of balance and homestead for the children as well?
Right. Yeah, and I think certainly when our careers, yours and mine, were building and developing, I think certainly in Canada it was a much more nomadic life than it is now. I mean, people. My experience was that people moved back and forth across the country sort of endlessly. I don't know that. I mean, I know that it's not as common now for people to be able to work. If you're in Toronto, you tend not to be working out west or out east. I mean, sometimes you do, but not at all the way it used to be. And I remember an actor who mostly worked out of town. He lived in Toronto, but rarely worked here. And he once showed me his his suitcase that was always packed, always ready, and it was a great lesson for me. I didn't I traveled a bit, but not that much. But realizing that it was a real thing for him to have absolutely everything ready to go, because you never knew.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, Sharry, thank you very much for
thank you.
the time, and for sending all those photographs, which will find their way onto our website and onto our podcast as we move into Series 2. So my thanks to you.
Thank you, Joel. It was lovely, and it was a gift. Thank you for the gift.
Oh, sure. And
my first equity card, and now this.
That's right. Is this your first?
Circle.
Is this your first podcast?
Yeah, I would say that's probably true. I hadn't really thought about it.
Okay, well, a series of firsts.
Yes.
Every 55 or so years, I will do something to take you into a place you've never been. To all of you who are listening, thank you. Thank you for joining Life in Stages, for telling your friends, for sharing these episodes, and for supporting this podcast as you can by e-transfer if you're in Canada, by emailing Jerica Life in Stages, Jerica Life in Stages @rogers.com. And for those of you outside of the country, Patreon is where you will go. Patreon.com, patreon.com/Life in Stages. And the directions there are very clear. Thanks again, and I certainly look forward to having our next guest very soon. Bye-bye.